He thought humiliating her would entertain the room, but Professor Richard Harrington had no idea he was about to witness the most embarrassing moment of his celebrated career. The lecture hall at Texas State University had never been so quiet. More than 200 graduate students, visiting academics, and donors sat frozen beneath the bright ceiling lights as a woman in a faded gray cardigan placed a piece of chalk on the tray below the board. 47 seconds. That was all it had taken. Harrington stood 3 feet away, staring at the symbols covering the blackboard as though they had betrayed him personally. His lips parted, but no words came out. The digital clock above the exit door glowed in red silence. No one laughed now. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. 20 minutes earlier, no one in that room had noticed Emily Carter. She entered quietly through the side doors carrying a worn notebook and a canvas tote bag with frayed straps. At 38, Emily moved with the practiced modesty of someone used to being overlooked. Her brown hair was pinned back simply, and her flat shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. She chose the last row near the aisle and sat alone while conversations swirled around her. A pair of doctoral students glanced back and smirked. One whispered that the facility's staff must have come to clean after the symposium. The other chuckled and returned to his laptop. Emily heard them. She gave no sign that she had. On stage, assistants adjusted microphones and arranged bottled water beside a polished oak podium. Then the side door opened, and Professor Richard Harrington stepped into the room as if entering a private theater built in his honor. His navy suit was tailored to perfection, his silver hair combed with mathematical precision, and the applause began. Before he even reached the podium, Harrington was the university's star scholar, a best-selling author, a department chair, and a man famous for brilliance sharpened by vanity. He thanked the crowd with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Today, he announced, we discuss boundaries of human reasoning. His voice rolled through the hall with practiced authority. Some problems are elegant. Some are difficult, and a rare few separate true minds from everyone else. Pens lifted. Phones recorded. Emily opened her notebook and wrote the date neatly in the corner of the page. Harrington began filling the board with symbols, transforming it into a forest of variables, limits, and proofs. Students leaned forward. Visiting professors nodded gravely. Emily watched without blinking. Twice she underlined something in her notes. Once, very softly, she sighed. Harrington noticed. He noticed everything that threatened his stage. His eyes moved toward the last row and paused on the woman in the cardigan. He saw plain clothes, tired shoes, no credentials around her neck, no status signal he respected. His mouth twitched. By the end of today, he declared, writing one final expression in large white strokes, you will see a problem no one in this room can solve. A hush fell across the hall. Emily looked up fully for the first time. Her eyes were steady now, and somewhere beneath the weight of old disappointment, something had begun to wake. Professor Harrington stepped back from the board and folded his arms with the satisfaction of a man unveiling a monument to himself. The equation behind him stretched from one side of the blackboard to the other, layered with substitutions, nested functions, and boundary conditions that made even seasoned scholars narrow their eyes. A murmur moved through the lecture hall. Several students immediately lifted their phones to photograph it. Others stared down at notebooks, pretending to understand more than they did. Harrington let the silence grow until it belonged to him. This, he said, tapping the center of the board with a polished pointer, is a variant I developed during my latest research. It has resisted every graduate candidate who has attempted it. He paced slowly across the stage. Some challenges are not meant for everyone. A few people laughed politely. Emily Carter continued writing in her notebook. She copied only 3 lines from the entire board. Then she stopped and looked up again. Her expression was calm, but something in it had changed. Harrington noticed once more. Questions? He asked, though his tone suggested he expected none worth hearing. Hands remained down. Eyes avoided contact. The room knew his reputation. A wrong question could become public entertainment. Then, from the back row, one hand rose quietly. Not halfway. Not timidly, simply raised. Heads turned in sequence until every face found Emily. Harrington squinted as if trying to remember whether he had invited the interruption. Yes, he said. The woman in the back. Emily stood. Her voice was soft, but clear enough to reach the front row. In your third transformation, the denominator assumes continuity after the shift. Would that not fail under the outer boundary condition? The room went still. Two visiting professors exchanged a glance. A student near the aisle stopped typing mid-sentence. Harrington's smile remained, but it tightened at the edges. Your name? He asked. Emily Carter. And your department, Miss Carter? Emily hesitated only a second. I am not part of a department. A ripple of amusement spread through the hall. Harrington tilted his head. Not part of a department, he repeated. How wonderfully mysterious. Then perhaps you are here for personal enrichment. More laughter. Emily did not sit down. I am here to listen, she said, and to ask if the assumption is valid. Harrington placed both hands on the podium. My dear Miss Carter, mathematical rigor is not a matter of casual intuition. It requires training, discipline, and years of specialized work. He glanced toward the audience. Not every concern deserves equal weight simply because it is spoken aloud. The laughter returned, stronger now. Emily's cheeks colored, but her eyes never dropped. In the front row, a woman with an MIT badge frowned sharply. Harrington saw her reaction and decided to push harder. Vanity often mistakes restraint for weakness. Still, he said, lifting a stick of chalk, perhaps I should not dismiss curiosity. Come forward, Miss Carter. Since you seem troubled by my method, you may correct it yourself. A low gasp moved through the room. Students turned in their seats. Some smiled openly now, sensing humiliation dressed as generosity. Emily remained still for a heartbeat. Then she closed her notebook, slid it into her tote bag, and walked down the long center aisle. Her shoes made almost no sound. Each step seemed to quiet another whisper. Harrington held out the chalk with a theatrical flourish. Take your time, he said. We are all eager to learn. Emily accepted the chalk gently. Up close, she seemed even more ordinary to those who judged by surfaces. Plain cardigan. No jewelry. No title. No audience on her side. She turned toward the board and studied the equation without writing a single mark. The red clock above the exit door clicked to the next minute. And for the first time that morning, Professor Richard Harrington felt something unfamiliar enter the room. Emily Carter stood before the blackboard as if the laughter behind her belonged to another room entirely. She did not rush. She did not defend herself. She simply studied the equation in silence, her eyes moving across each symbol with the patience of someone reading an old language she had never forgotten. Professor Harrington remained beside the podium, one hand resting on polished wood, the other tucked casually into his pocket. He wore the faint smile of a man certain the next few minutes would become another story told in faculty lounges. If the notation appears intimidating, he said, loud enough for the hall to hear, you may begin with simpler observations. A few students chuckled. Emily said nothing. She reached for the eraser, wiped away one narrow line near the center of the board, and rewrote it cleaner, shorter, sharper. The sound of felt against slate seemed louder than the room itself. Harrington's smile thinned. Interesting, he said, though cosmetic improvements are not proofs. Emily moved to the left side of the board and wrote 3 symbols beneath his opening. Statement, then a bracket, then a substitution no one expected. In the front row, the woman from MIT straightened in her seat. A visiting professor from Stanford leaned forward so quickly his glasses slid down his nose. Pens began moving again, but now with urgency. Students were no longer taking notes for class. They were recording a moment they did not yet understand. Emily's hand steadied with each line. The tremor that had touched her fingers was gone. She crossed out an unnecessary assumption, rewrote the constraint, and transformed the equation into something suddenly elegant. The hall grew so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights became noticeable. Harrington stepped away from the podium. That pathway collapses at the boundary, he said quickly. Emily answered without turning around. Only if the boundary is treated as fixed. She wrote another line. It is not. A whisper passed through the front rows. Harrington blinked. Emily continued. Numbers became structure. Structure became clarity. What had looked impossible 20 minutes earlier now unfolded with graceful inevitability. She moved to the far right side of the board and finished the final reduction with one short stroke of chalk. Then she stepped back. The red digital clock above the exit door changed again. 47 seconds had passed since she made the first mark. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Harrington walked to the board, scanning each line with rising tension. His eyes moved faster, then slower, then back again. He checked the substitution. Valid. He checked the constraint. Corrected. He checked the reduction. Cleaner than his own. A student near the center whispered, "No way." Another simply stared with his mouth open. The woman from MIT rose to her feet first and began to applaud once, twice, then steadily. The sound echoed across the stunned hall. Others followed in scattered bursts until the room filled with applause that felt almost disbelieving. Harrington did not join them. He remained inches from the board, searching desperately for an error that refused to exist. Emily placed the chalk on the tray and folded her hands. "Your third transformation was elegant," she said gently. It only needed one different assumption. There was no triumph in her voice, only honesty. That made it worse. Harrington turned slowly toward the audience, but the authority he had worn all morning no longer fit. The students who once laughed now looked at Emily with open astonishment, some with admiration, some with shame. The room had chosen a new center of gravity. Harrington cleared his throat. No words came. Emily picked up her tote bag. The woman from MIT stepped into the aisle and called out, "Miss Carter, where did you study?" Emily paused, one hand on the strap, and glanced back with calm eyes. "Mostly at night," she said. Then the hall fell silent all over again. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the lecture hall in waves, uneven at first, then stronger as disbelief gave way to admiration. Emily Carter stood near the board with the same quiet posture she had carried into the room, as if none of it belonged to her. Professor Richard Harrington, however, looked like a man whose reflection had suddenly become unfamiliar. He adjusted his cufflinks, glanced toward the back doors, then toward the board again, searching for control the way others search for lost keys. The woman from MIT made her way down the aisle and offered Emily a warm hand. "Dr. Naomi Chun," she said. "That was remarkable." Emily shook it gently. "Thank you. Where did you publish that method?" Naomi asked. Emily blinked once. "I did not." The answer landed like another surprise. Several professors who had begun gathering near the stage exchanged startled looks. One older man from Stanford cleared his throat. "You mean to say that reduction was original?" Emily hesitated. "I do not know if it is original. It is simply how I saw it." The room murmured again. Harrington stepped forward at last, voice sharpened by urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us maintain perspective. Solving a single adaptation under public pressure is impressive, yes, but mathematics is not theater." He forced a smile. "Consistency, publication, peer review, long discipline. Those are the true measures." Naomi Chun turned slowly toward him. "Then perhaps we should discuss consistency, Richard." The room quieted instantly. She gestured to the board. "Her solution corrected an assumption your paper draft repeated twice in the preprint you circulated last month." Several heads snapped toward Harrington. One graduate student nearly dropped his pen. Harrington's face tightened. "That draft was preliminary." "Of course," Naomi said evenly. Yet she identified the weakness in under a minute. Emily lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with conflict that was never her aim. She reached for her tote bag again, but a young student stepped into the aisle before she could leave. "Miss Carter," he said, voice shaking with excitement. "How did you know where to start?" I returned to her. Emily looked at the crowded hall, then at the board. "Most people begin where the problem is loudest," she said softly. "I try to begin where it is hiding." Pens moved instantly. Phones recorded. Even those who had laughed now leaned forward to catch every word. Harrington saw the shift happen in real time. The room no longer waited for him. It waited for her. He moved toward the podium and tapped the microphone. "We will conclude today's symposium here." His tone was clipped, brittle. No one stood. No one gathered bags. Naomi Chun smiled faintly. "Actually, Richard, I believe they would like to hear more from Ms. Carter." The applause returned, louder than before. Harrington's hand froze on the microphone stem. Emily shook her head gently. "I am not prepared to lecture anyone." "You already did," Naomi replied. Laughter broke out, but this time it was warm, not cruel. Emily's cheeks colored. She glanced at the board one final time, then spoke with the same calm voice that had first challenged the room. "I used to study here years ago," she said. "I left when my mother became ill. Tuition could wait." She could not. The hall went silent in a different way now. After work, after hospital visits, after bills were paid, I kept reading. Some people run to rest. I ran to numbers. A student in the second row quietly wiped his eyes. Harrington stared at the floor. The symbols behind him seemed less like achievements now and more like decorations. Emily adjusted the strap of her bag. "I should go? My shift starts in 20 minutes. "Your shift?" Naomi asked. Emily nodded. "Night records office. Basement level." The room sat stunned once more. The brightest mind in the building had been filing archives below their feet, and no one had thought to look there. No one moved for several seconds after Emily Carter mentioned the basement records office. It was the kind of silence that arrives when pride realizes it has been careless. Then chairs scraped the floor all at once. Students stood. Visiting scholars gathered their folders. Faculty members who had ignored her for years suddenly searched their memories, wondering if they had passed her in hallways without seeing her at all. Emily gave a small nod to Dr. Naomi Chun and stepped down from the stage. She did not walk like a conqueror. She walked like a woman trying not to be late for work. The crowd parted for her instinctively. Professor Richard Harrington remained near the podium, one hand resting on the microphone, the other hanging stiffly at his side. For the first time in a long career, he had no room left to dominate. A graduate student approached Emily near the aisle. "Miss Carter, would you sign my notes?" he asked nervously. She smiled with surprised kindness. "They are your notes," she said. "You should sign them yourself after you solve something difficult." Laughter warmed the room again. Another student hurried forward. "Can I ask what books you recommend?" Emily adjusted her tote bag. "Start with the ones that confuse you," she said. "Then stay longer than your frustration wants you to." Pens moved furiously. Phones recorded every word. Harrington watched as wisdom flowed effortlessly from the woman he had tried to reduce to a joke. Naomi Chun stepped beside him without invitation. "You built a reputation on brilliance," she said quietly. "Do not lose what remains of it defending arrogance." Harrington kept his eyes forward. "You think one stunt changes everything?" Naomi's expression did not move. "No, I think it revealed everything that was already there." Across the hall, Emily reached the doors. Before she could leave, the Dean of Sciences entered from the corridor, breathless from hearing the commotion. Dean Margaret Holloway was known for efficiency, not drama, but even she paused when she saw the packed room facing the exits instead of the stage. "What happened here?" she asked. A dozen voices answered at once. Someone pointed to the board. Someone pointed to Emily. Holloway looked from the flawless proof to the woman holding a canvas tote bag. "Ms. Carter," she said carefully, "would you join me for a conversation this afternoon?" Emily glanced at the wall clock. "I have a shift until 6. "Then 6:15, said the dean. "My office will wait." The room broke into applause yet again. Emily gave the smallest smile and slipped into the hallway. The doors closed softly behind her. Inside, attention turned back to the blackboard like pilgrims studying a monument. Graduate students copied every line before custodial staff could erase it. Two professors debated whether the method could simplify broader classes of problems. Naomi Chun photographed the proof, then tucked away her phone with visible satisfaction. Harrington finally stepped toward the board and lifted the eraser. "I would not do that," Naomi said. He stopped. "Why not?" "Because," she replied, "it no longer belongs to you." The sentence landed harder than any shout. He set the eraser down. In the basement records office, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of gray shelves and labeled archive boxes. Emily tied back her hair, logged into an old desktop computer, and resumed scanning student transcripts as if the morning had been ordinary. Her co-worker Luis rolled his chair over, eyes wide. "Everyone upstairs is talking about some genius who embarrassed Harrington." Emily opened the next file. "People enjoy stories," she said. Luis studied her for a moment. "Was it you?" Emily looked at the screen and smiled faintly. "I still have 300 folders before dinner, Luis." He laughed and rolled away, unconvinced. Above them, the university buzzed like a shaken hive. Below them, the brightest mind on campus quietly alphabetized records. And somewhere in the distance, for the first time in many years, Richard Harrington understood what being Overlooked actually felt like. By 6:15 that evening, the top floor of the science building looked different to Emily Carter than it ever had before. She had spent years crossing campus unnoticed, carrying boxes, sorting files, fixing mislabeled records, and holding doors open for people who never learned her name. Now the receptionist outside the dean's office stood the moment Emily approached. "Miss Carter, Dean Holloway is expecting you." The words were polite, but the surprise beneath them was impossible to hide. Emily thanked her and stepped inside. Dean Margaret Holloway rose from behind a walnut desk lined with framed diplomas and donor plaques. Dr. Naomi Chun sat near the window, reading from a printed copy of the morning's proof. She smiled warmly when Emily entered. "Please," said the dean, gesturing to a chair. "Would you like coffee or tea?" Emily almost laughed. "Water is fine." Holloway poured it herself. Such small gestures often reveal large changes. "Ms. Carter," the dean began. "How long have you worked here?" 9 years, Emily replied. "Records office for 6. Library archives before that." Holloway blinked. "And before that?" Emily folded her hands. "Graduate studies. Applied mathematics. I left during my 2nd year." Naomi looked up. "Why?" Emily answered plainly. "My mother needed full-time care. Scholarships covered tuition, not treatment." No one spoke for a moment. Outside the office windows, sunset painted the campus gold. Holloway opened a folder. "Your former advisor was Professor Alan Mercer." Emily nodded. "He wrote that your thesis draft showed exceptional originality." Emily looked down. "He was generous." Naomi placed the printed proof on the desk. "No," she said gently. "He was accurate." Holloway leaned forward. "I am going to be direct. This university failed to notice someone extraordinary standing inside its own walls. I would like to discuss correcting that failure." Emily's expression stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around the water glass. "I do not need sympathy." "Good," said Holloway. "I am offering opportunity." She slid a document across the desk. It was a proposal for a funded research fellowship. Tuition reinstatement, office space, and full access to departmental resources. Emily stared at the page without touching it. "This is too much." "No," Naomi said. "It is late." Down the hall, footsteps approached sharply. The office door opened before anyone answered. Professor Richard Harrington entered, tie loosened, pride still trying to stand upright. "Dean Holloway, I requested a meeting." He stopped when he saw Emily. The room cooled instantly. Holloway did not invite him to sit. "You are interrupting one." Harrington straightened. "I came to address the spectacle from this morning. The department cannot make decisions based on public excitement." Naomi crossed one leg calmly. "Then perhaps it is fortunate we are making them based on merit." Harrington ignored her. Ms. Carter's performance was notable, but academic appointments require standards. Emily met his eyes for the first time without hesitation. "Standards are important," she said quietly. "That is why assumptions must be checked." Naomi smiled into her coffee cup. Harrington's jaw tightened. Holloway opened another folder. "Professor Harrington, 3 faculty members have already confirmed Ms. Carter's abandoned thesis anticipated methods now considered cutting edge. 2 more are reviewing archived notes from the library basement that were filed under employee storage." Harrington looked stunned. "Employee storage?" Emily answered softly. "I wrote during lunch breaks." The room went silent. Holloway continued. "Additionally, several students submitted concerns this afternoon regarding your conduct toward non-traditional attendees." Harrington's shoulders sank a fraction. The dean's voice remained level. "You will be taking an immediate leave from public symposium duties pending review." No one raised their voice. None was needed. Harrington glanced from the dean to Naomi, then to Emily. He seemed ready to argue, then saw no audience left to persuade. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed with careful softness. Holloway looked back at Emily. "Now," she said, tapping the fellowship offer. "Where would you like to begin?" Emily finally reached for the pen. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Emily Carter held it above the fellowship agreement while the room waited with unusual patience. For years she had signed forms for storage requests, payroll corrections, archive transfers, and maintenance logs. Papers that kept institutions moving while no one noticed the hands that moved them. This page was different. It asked her to step back into a life she had set aside so quietly that even she had stopped speaking of it. "You do not need to answer tonight. Dean Margaret Holloway said gently. Emily looked up. If I wait too long, I might convince myself not to. Naomi Chin smiled. That sounds like someone who already knows the answer. Emily lowered the pen and signed her name in neat, careful letters. The room seemed to exhale. Holloway extended her hand first. Welcome back, Miss Carter. Naomi followed. I would prefer Dr. Carter eventually, she said with a playful calm that made Emily laugh for the first time that day. The next morning, campus sunlight spilled across sidewalks, buzzing with rumor. By 8 o'clock, students were already gathered outside the mathematics building, retelling the story in louder versions than truth required. Some said Emily solved 3 problems, not 1. Others claimed Harrington had stormed out in defeat. A freshman insisted she had memorized every theorem ever written. Legends grow fastest where arrogance has recently fallen. Emily arrived carrying the same canvas tote bag and wearing the same gray cardigan. This time, doors opened before she touched them. The receptionist who once waved her past without looking now stood immediately. Good morning, Miss Carter. Your office keys are ready. Office keys. Emily repeated the phrase silently, as if testing whether it belonged to her. A graduate assistant escorted her upstairs to a small corner office with 2 windows, a chalkboard, and shelves still empty enough to promise possibility. On the desk sat a new notebook, university stationery, and a handwritten card from Naomi Chun. It read, "The world often stores treasure in basements. Glad someone finally opened the boxes." Emily smiled and set the card carefully in the top drawer. Before she could sit, there was a knock. 3 graduate students stood in the doorway holding notebooks with the uncertain expressions of people approaching someone they had underestimated. The first was the young man who had laughed when she raised her hand. "Miss Carter," he said, voice low, "we wanted to apologize." Emily studied them kindly. Shame can harden some people. It can improve others. For what? She asked. He swallowed. For assuming things about you. For yesterday. Emily considered this, then stepped aside from the doorway. Come in, she said. If you have energy for regret, you have energy for learning. They entered quickly. By noon, 5 more students had joined them. By 1 o'clock, every chair was taken, and 2 sat on the floor. Emily did not lecture like Harrington. She asked questions. She listened longer than people expected. She praised clear thinking more than correct answers. When someone made a mistake, she called it useful information. When someone said a problem was impossible, she smiled softly and asked, "Impossible for whom?" Word spread faster than any official memo. By afternoon, students lined the hallway hoping to join her informal session. Faculty members passing by slowed down, pretending to check messages while listening through the open door. Inside, the room felt brighter than its fluorescent lights deserved. Late that day, Emily walked across campus to the basement records office to collect a framed photo of her mother that had sat beside her old computer for years. Luis looked up and grinned. "Professor Carter now?" Emily shook her head. "Not yet." He handed her the photo. "They already replaced your desk. New scanner too. Figures." Emily laughed softly. "Keep it running better than they deserve." As she turned to leave, Luis called after her. "You know what I liked most about yesterday?" Emily paused. "What?" He leaned back in his chair. "You never acted small. You just acted quiet." Emily carried the photo upstairs. Some people mistake the difference for a lifetime. She had only mistaken it for 9 years. 2 weeks later, room 314 of the mathematics building could no longer hold the people trying to enter it. Students lined. Both sides of the hallway carrying notebooks, coffee cups, laptops, and the unmistakable expression of people who had heard something unusual was happening behind one ordinary classroom door. They were not there for extra credit. They were there because Emily Carter had made difficult things feel possible. Inside, every seat was taken 15 minutes before class began. Several professors stood quietly in the back, pretending they were only observing pedagogy. Dean Margaret Holloway sat near the side wall with a legal pad on her lap. Naomi Chin leaned against the window, smiling as if she had expected this all along. Emily entered carrying the same canvas tote bag and a stack of borrowed chalk. The room fell silent on its own. She still seemed surprised by that. "Good morning," she said. "Today we are discussing why people fear proofs that look unfamiliar." Pens lifted instantly. She wrote a simple statement on the board and turned back to them. Many students believe intelligence feels like certainty. It does not. Most days, It feels like confusion you chose not to run from. Heads nodded across the room. Even the students who once admired Harrington's sharpness now leaned toward a gentler kind of authority. Emily moved through the lesson with patience that never became slow and rigor that never became cruel. When someone offered a wrong answer, she thanked them for helping everyone locate the next right question. When a nervous sophomore apologized for not understanding, Emily said, "Understanding is not an elevator. It is stairs." Laughter softened the room. Then concentration returned stronger than before. Halfway through class, the rear door opened quietly. Professor Richard Harrington stepped inside. Conversations died instantly. He wore a plain gray suit without the polished confidence that once arrived before him. There was no podium now, no stage lights, no audience waiting to be impressed. He stood at the back beside the last row, holding a folder with both hands. Emily noticed him and continued teaching without pause. If she felt satisfaction, she did not display it. That restraint was another lesson. At the end of the hour, students rose reluctantly, lingering to ask questions or simply remain near the atmosphere they had come to value. Harrington waited until the room thinned. Then he walked down the center aisle where Emily was erasing the board. Every eye still present followed him. Some moments carry their own gravity. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice sounded older than before. Emily turned. "Professor Harrington." He extended the folder. "These are copies of your archive thesis notes. I requested them returned to you properly cataloged." Emily accepted the folder but did not open it. Harrington drew a slow breath. "I also came to apologize." The room went still. A student near the door froze with one backpack strap half raised. Harrington kept speaking. "I mistook status for substance. I valued being admired more than being accurate, and I treated someone deserving respect as though she were convenient entertainment." He lowered his eyes briefly. "That was beneath the standards I claimed to defend." No one moved. Emily studied him with calm eyes that had already survived worse than pride. "Thank you for saying it," she replied. Harrington nodded once, relief and embarrassment crossing his face together. "You have built something in 2 weeks that I failed to build in 20 years, he said, glancing at the crowded room. "People are not afraid here." Emily looked around at the students gathering in the doorway, waiting for office hours to begin. "Fear is fast," she said softly. "Learning is slower." Harrington almost smiled. He stepped aside to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, your proof was elegant." Emily opened the folder and glanced at the handwritten pages she had created years ago during lunch breaks and midnight hours. "So was your apology," she said. The room exhaled at once. Harrington left quietly through the same rear door he entered. No applause followed him. Some exits are too private for sound. Emily set the folder on her desk, picked up fresh chalk, and faced the waiting line of students. Outside, the hallway stretched farther than before. By the end of the semester, students were arriving 30 minutes early just to find a seat in Emily Carter's class. Some sat on the floor, along the walls. Others stood in the hallway and listened through the open door, notebooks balanced against their knees. No one complained. They had learned that the most valuable lessons in the building were now given by a woman who once filed records in the basement. The course catalog still listed her title modestly as visiting research fellow, but across campus she had become something harder to label. To anxious freshmen, she was hope. To graduate students exhausted by performance, she was proof that brilliance did not need cruelty. To faculty members, she was a quiet correction. Emily never seemed interested in any of it. She still carried the same canvas tote bag. She still wore practical shoes. She still thanked janitors by name and returned library books early. Fame had knocked politely, and she had chosen not to answer the door. One cold December afternoon, the university hosted its annual academic awards ceremony in the grand auditorium. Chandeliers glowed above rows of polished seats. Donors, trustees, faculty, and families filled the room in winter coats and pressed suits. Dean Margaret Holloway stood at the podium announcing honors for research, teaching, and public service. Emily sat near the back beside Louise from the records office, who had borrowed a tie and adjusted it every 5 minutes. "I still do not know why I am here," Emily whispered. Louise grinned. "Because for once they invited the right person." When the dean reached the final award, her voice softened. "This year, The Chancellor's Medal for Excellence is given to someone who reminded us that institutions are strongest when they recognize worth beyond appearances, titles, and noise. A hush fell. Ms. Emily Carter. The auditorium erupted. Students stood first, then faculty, then nearly everyone else. The applause rose so quickly it startled even the musicians waiting at the side stage. Emily froze in her seat. Luis pointed toward the aisle. "Go," he said, "before they give it to somebody less qualified." Smiling helplessly, Emily walked to the stage under a standing ovation that seemed determined not to end. She accepted the medal from the dean with both hands, as if it were something fragile. Cameras flashed. Faces beamed. In the third row, Naomi Chin applauded with visible pride. Near the side aisle, Richard Harrington also stood and clapped. Not out of obligation, out of understanding. Dean Holloway offered Emily the microphone. "Would you like to say a few words?" Emily looked at the crowd, then at the medal, then back at the crowd again. "I am not very practiced at speeches," she said, drawing warm laughter. She paused. "For many years, I believe my life had gone off course because I had to leave one path to care for someone I loved. I thought opportunity had closed behind me." The room listened without movement. But kindness is never a detour. Responsibility is never wasted time. And learning does not expire because the calendar changes. Several parents in the audience wiped their eyes. Students leaned forward to catch every word. Emily continued. "There may be people in this room who feel behind, overlooked, too old, too quiet, too ordinary, or too late. You are none of those things. You may simply